Designing against complexity. I wrote an article a while ago called "Designers Aren't Equipped to Solve the Problems of the Future," and I talked about how designers need to take like a systems thinking approach to kind of make sense of the complexity of the bigger problems that we're being asked to like solve. Like in the healthcare space, there is scale and complexity, and if you like, I'm sure if you've worked in the healthcare space and you've tried to map out, like try to make some sort of model about how things like work, the internal workings of this healthcare space or this or that, it ends up looking like a spaghetti, like just strings and things going everywhere. And trying to make sense of it is incredibly, incredibly complicated. And trying to make an impact in something that complex is pretty tough. And it does require like a systems thinking approach. Um, but in this article, I argue that taking a systems thinking approach isn't exactly always feasible. It's not something that the designers are equipped to do, to be perfectly frank, and that companies are willing to take the approach of doing. So I argue that the first line of defense is to try to avoid complexity altogether, because just being in an environment that's complex brings up so many more challenges than if you weren't. So probably what I argue here is that the first line of defense should be to avoid complexity altogether, because it does bring in a whole bunch more aspects you have to deal with that if you can avoid is probably the first thing you should try to do. But also I think a lot of the times those problems come up because of the complex environment that you're in. And I think if you weren't in that complex environment, some of those problems maybe wouldn't have existed, or those interactions that happen with other parts of the company or other elements of that like environment or something like that. A lot of things just maybe wouldn't like emerge. Like for example, like there's a really good over here in the US, we have this thing called like Minute Clinic, and it's been around for like a long time. And Minute Clinic, I mean, I think they got bought by CVS, but Minute Clinic, um, they're not like a hospital. They're a small clinic, and well, it used to be a small clinic. But you go in, you're like, okay, if I have a cold or something small, something that I know, I can go in there and I can get checked for a cold or something like small, or if I need to get a shot of something, you can go in and you can get out, and it's super super quick. Um, as opposed to doing something similar to that in a hospital, it takes forever. It takes a very, 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 very long time. And a lot of those problems come up because of the complex environment that a hospital is. So, like for example, like the Minute Clinic, I think is a good example of designing against like complexity, because they were like, okay, we're gonna set up some walls and a lot of these extra stuff that a hospital has, a lot of these other services that provide that we're not going to provide. We're going to provide this one small uh, sliver of the process, but we're going to do that really, really fast, really, really cheap, and it's going to be really affordable, and we can get people in and out real quick. But in a hospital, you have all these things going on, tons and tons of things going on. So in order for someone to do something super simple, like I have a cough, I just want to get treated for this cough, it will take you like it could take you hours. So I think sometimes it's just like the complexity in the environment just brings up so many new scenarios and situations and problems that otherwise wouldn't have happened.
But if I get a problem statement, let's say you have to design an app, like a social media app, photo sharing app, like maybe a Instagram, but I'm giving a problem statement that you have to design an app for where people can share apps, share photos. Right now, this is an open-ended statement. Right now,
Mm.
what users would want, what they would need. Now, how do I come to that simple solution of just sharing an app? But because when I will do my benchmarking and when I'll do my research, I probably have 100 other features which I want to put into that app.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. So like the question is like what's a good signal and what's noise? Like what even things are relevant to solving this problem and what things are not relevant to, or not even solving it, but just even shaping up what the problem is, right?
Right.
Um, and that's tough. So one of the things, and this is something like that I've kind of talked about before, but um, if I want to know how to design like some new app or something for somebody, um, like I don't like it's not my Eduardo-ness, my persona-ness that makes me want like a product. It's a lot more about the situation that I find that I like the context that I'm in that pushes me to want something. So if I'm the first question that I would ask if you're trying to create like some new photo sharing app, like why does Instagram even exist if Facebook can do everything Instagram can, right? It's probably like is an interesting question. And then the next question is like, are there times that people want to take a picture but don't? Like, is there even demand for that kind of like a solution? Is there even a situation like where that problem wants to be solved? So it's not, I'm not looking at your Eduardo-ness or your persona-ness or anything like that. It's like, when do you want to take a picture? But you, and this is something that Bob Moesta talks a lot of in the job to be done world. But like, when do you want to take a picture? But don't. And it turns out there's like a sliver of times that you want to share a picture. Like originally when Instagram was like small, it was more around I want to take a picture of like the food that I'm gonna eat, or this small thing, or this other thing, and like I have this terrible camera, and I don't want to be worried about how terrible this picture is. So the filters kind of became this really big enabler for I want to share this picture in this that I normally wouldn't do it on Facebook. So like in Facebook, I wouldn't post, might be less likely to post a picture of my food and that kind of stuff. So I think if you're looking at those sort of problems, or if you're asking those kind of questions, it's you have to kind of uncover like where is there that struggle and where do I want to share these pictures, but I didn't. So
Oh, that was amazing. Yeah, that was interesting. Nice. So how much research is like enough research for you?
oh man. Um wow, that's a really good question. How much research is enough research? This is gonna sound really like vague, but I guess this is how I kind of like see it like in my head. If I can get like a crispy problem statement where I do understand the context, I understand like where there's like demand for something, and I understand like where like what's the next step, or what's the thing that people want to do but they can't or they struggle to, and if I feel like I can get that written out
Mhm.
pretty clearly, I don't need a whole lot after that to then start making like some prototypes, some sketches or something to like to that extent. But I like I think there's like some milestones that I kind of have to hit along the way. Um like if there's like a workaround, or if there's like if if people and evidence that people want to do something but can't or don't is a lot of times like there's like some compensating behavior, like they're they're struggling with not being able to kind of take this next step, or they have this workaround, or like for example, on Instagram, a workaround might be like, oh, people did take a picture of their food and whatever, but they just showed it to them just like this, like on their phone, like that. They didn't actually post it anywhere or anything. Um, that might be like a workaround. Those little kind of compensating behaviors are little nuggets that I look for as like,
Mhm.
okay, there's something to this, and a lot of times just I feel like it gives me the green light to kind of move forward. But how much research is enough? If is enough research? That's a really good question. I don't know if I know. I've been suspect to like analysis paralysis, where I look at it too much, and I feel like sometimes in my research I'm not making progress. I feel like sometimes I'm like on a treadmill. Um, but getting some breadcrumbs and kind of some milestones helps me know that I'm kind of moving in the right direction sometimes.
So do you prioritize your insights? Like, if you have 10 insights, you may not be able to work on all of them, right? Maybe there are limitations in resources. So I
Hmm.
normally use a Kano model to prioritize it, like primary, secondary, tertiary. But how do you approach that?
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that's a really, really good question. Like, how do you decide what to design is always a really tough question. And I think it kind of comes down to, in my eyes, like broadly speaking, it's like what the customer wants, which is like a really broad, really, really, really broad, just saying like where demand for customer comes from and what they want. All that stuff that we talked about for Instagram. What does the business what does the business have appetite to make? I think is another big question. Um, what is the business like capable of doing? Like for
Mhm.
example, like what does the business want to make? That's a lot of if you're a brand new startup, um, your appetite of what you want to make is different than if you're a company that's been around for like a long time.
Yeah.
Like sometimes companies like, we want to make something new because we want to we want to we feel like we've been a little stuck and the company is like, all right, we want to do this shiny new thing. And so if the company has an appetite for some shiny new thing, that's something that's that that's going to impact what you should be designing, because that's what the company is kind of prioritizing at the moment. So what the company wants to make, what the company is capable of doing, like you know, like our company is not going to be making mattresses anytime soon. Like so, like what in our business model and our business structure is our company capable of doing is another important question. So mm, those kind of questions are also important. But if I'm just looking at just like the customer perspective and wondering like, should I make these features over these features? Should I have these ideas over these ideas? I have all these problems that we can look at and do. Like, which ones should I put a big X over and say not now, and which ones should I totally do? I think like that question, when you have a good, I like the jobs to be done theory a lot because it gives me a good sense of like how to prioritize what might be meaningful and what might be a valuable addition to a product and what might not. Um, like for example, do you know like Tide Pods, like the detergent, the laundry detergent, Tide Pods? Have you heard about these?
No, no, not really.
It, it's like, okay, so there's like this is a weird example, but you just follow me here. So like we have to wash clothes, we have like these like laundry like detergent
Yeah.
jugs, right? That you pour into your clothes, and then you wash it and you forget about it. There's also these like little like uh little like plastic balls of detergent that's just like an individual piece where you
Okay.
just throw it into the washer and then you can wash it, right? So I used to have like the jugs when I was like when I was living at home with my parents, and like the laundry machine was in the apartment complex. But then
Okay.
when I moved somewhere else, and then the washing machine was like downstairs, and I had to carry all my clothes, and then also carry my jug, and then I had to kind of try to funnel it all the
Right.
way down. I would drop it, I would drop this, and then sometimes I would forget it in the laundry room and all this kind of stuff. So when I saw like the Tide Pods, they were like, oh, I can just put it in my pocket and I don't have to like go back upstairs, and I can use more hands to save myself trips downstairs with all my like clothes. So at that point, what I'm saying is like, in that context, you can get a sense of what features are or not important. Like, does it smell delicious? It's not the most
Yeah.
important thing to me. I'm willing to make that trade-off. Is it something that is like pocketable and can help me move downstairs? That is like right up there in the priority list. Does it clean amazing? I don't. It's not what I brought that product. It's not the need that I had. So when you get a really good sense of the context and what are the things that have to happen for a customer to be like, oh, this was really valuable, this was really convenient. What does convenient mean? Oh, convenient means like I can use my other hands to carry my laundry and all that kind of stuff. So when you have that kind of a context, you get a better sense of what trade-offs you can make, as opposed to which ones that you shouldn't.
Wow, amazing example. In fact, there was this guy we interviewed last week, and he said UX has one important essential component to it that is missing. Like not everyone is using it. That is called human logic. And I asked him the same question because he said that we all go in circles and we do so much research, but sometimes the solution is right in front of us. That we should just uncomplicate things and just use our human logic and solve the problem, but we'll still go through the entire process and come up with a completely different solution, which like you said, like might be complicated or
Mhm.
complex at the end of the day.
I'll politely sort of like disagree. I don't know if I think sometimes it could be like just totally self-evident that something is like this is the right solution. Um, but I think a lot of times like the solution is non-obvious and not what you would expect. Um, like why would Instagram succeed if if Facebook can do everything Instagram can?
Right.
I don't know if that sometimes would have been immediately like evident or obvious. And I think especially when you get to like the complex problems, um, the solution is a lot of the times non-obvious. In a previous article, I was talking about how these like these systems thinking folks try to revitalize this fishing population in a city in Mexico. And the first step was to build a soccer field. So that's a very non-obvious like solution. The reason they did that was because all the fishermen in the village were competing against each other, and that was driving the population of the fish down quite a bit. So the first thing that they had to do was they had to kind of put him under the same cause and same like umbrella, and the soccer field kind of became like a really important like meeting point and kind of congregation point. And sometimes like in these complex stuff, the solution I don't think is self-evident. Sometimes I think I agree, but other times it's kind of like a non-obvious way that you have to go about stuff, especially in like in complex stuff like this.
Like how to even think about these non-obvious solutions,
Yeah. Well,
right?
so like the really interesting thing that they learned is the issue happening there was like a system archetype called the tragedy of the commons. And a really important leverage point was the commons and helping them solve their own problem and equipping them with being able to solve their own problem. So like the first thing they had to do was have them stop competing with each other because they were all competing against each other for the last fish, and they were
Yeah,
going to get down to the last fish, and then the more they that they the less fish that they were, the more expensive each fish was, and then the less fish that they were, so the more so it became like race to the bottom, and then so the first thing that they did was try to get everybody under that kind of one umbrella, congregate, like, okay, we have this problem and we need to we kind of stop competing with each other. And then they kind of did a whole bunch of other stuff, like they tried to introduce other parts of the economy that wasn't just based on fish. So there was other, so there are a whole bunch of really interesting stuff that helped them revitalize that fish population. But sometimes it's um, a non-obvious solution to that sort of stuff. But I think that's where systems thinking can
yeah,
help, and where it's really hard to kind of get to those kind of conclusions.
yeah. This brings to me to this another topic which you were exploring in your article, that is called emergence,
Mm.
right? And the solution is not obvious. So, what exactly, for the sake of our audience, like what exactly is emergence, and a little bit about system design and system thinking as well.
Emergence is a property of like complexity. Like emergence is this like phenomena that happens. Like in one of the examples that I use was like if you look at oxygen on itself and hydrogen on itself, like there's nothing about them individually that tells you that together that they would make water.
Right.
Um, so it's about that. it's about that interaction that like some pattern emerges because these two separate things act kind of like in their own local rules, but together they make something like a new pattern emerges that's like something new. You can't take one piece of it and still have water. So or like I talk about like an ant colony, like a bunch of ants together make an ant colony, but nothing about like looking at one, like hundreds of individual ants will tell you that together they can make this really complicated ant colony. So a lot of so emergencies about those patterns that tend to come up through like these complex like environments. And systems thinking is a really helpful lens to look at how things interact and why complex, maybe not just complex, but why do systems kind of act like the way that they do? And it helps kind of inform you like, okay, which lever do I pull and which dial do I turn to get the outcome that I want. It's definitely like a really helpful thing to if you're trying to change like the status quo in like an environment. I think like systems thinking is definitely like a really important pair of glasses to put on, because it'll surface some of the stuff that I think I need to know to make those changes.
Do you think that today designers work on very specific problems and they work in an isolation? So I'll solve this problem, but it is isolated, and that's why do you say that we should have a system thinking approach where the solution is not isolated? It should it should have some connection with other things also interconnected, so that there's an emergence. Is that what you're saying, or
A little different. I think kind of where I'm getting at is I guess right now I see it as like there's two possibilities. Like one is you work to understand the complex environment that you're in, which is really tough, complicated, but sometimes maybe the only recourse that you have. Or you try to avoid complexity altogether and try to narrow down like the scope of what you're focusing on. Like like in the examples that I gave was like this, this, or just sticking with the hospital example. Like, do you want to be a minute clinic or do you want to deal with all the complexities of a hospital? So I see it as like there's or you could do nothing and then nothing will happen. But I see it as those two options. Like sometimes it's inevitable. You have to deal with the complexity that comes your way, because you live, like what you're working on is not gonna change, or some extent. I don't know. But in situations like that, you have to understand like the complexity that you're living in, and what emergent patterns pop up because of how you're working, what might be some of the unintended consequences that seem to emerge, and try to understand the system, in the way that it's behaving. But I think like the first line of defense should be to try to avoid complexity altogether when possible. I think that's kind of like the first line of defense that I'm kind of proposing on that one.
So like you said, cutting off interdependencies, which makes it more or less like minimalistic design, right? Because minimalistic is like stripping off to its most basic function. So designing against complexity, is it like approaching a minimalistic design, or it's something else from your perspective?
I think that's definitely like one way to look at it. It's like it takes like one functional slice all the way down. Like for example, like the minute clinic, or this Ohio plant. Like yeah, they are more simplistic, but they do like provide like a service like end to end. It's not just that they're it's not just the simplisticness of or the simplicity of it, but that is definitely like an ingredient. But it's also just the reduced scope of it sometimes that is like in I think what I'm trying to communicate.
Do you have any resources like any books you could recommend, or any blogs or articles about the topic you are exploring, like system design or system thinking?
Yeah, I would. I think there's for systems design there's Peter Senji.
Okay.
He's really good. Donella Meadows is um, she wrote a really good book, priming systems thinking. Kind of just, and what I mean by priming is like she kind of gave like a crash course into like the
Okay.
basics of like systems thinking. Um, and who was one more? Oh, and then Russell Ackoff is
Okay.
is another really good. Edward Deming has a lot of really good work as well. Um, they'll have Edward Deming and Russell Ackoff like the grandfathers of systems thinking, and I would probably include Danella Meadows in there somewhere. Um, super super smart, interesting people talking about really big, complicated problems and how they work, how they're structured, you know, and how they kind of go about like uncovering possible solutions for it. And for the other thing that we were talking about with like Instagram and Facebook and apps and features and how to know which ones to chase and which ones not to chase, um, I like Bob Moesta a lot and Ryan Singer a lot and
Oh,
Alan Clement quite a bit. They talk about like jobs to be done quite a bit and have a really good perspective on like how to make trade-offs and what problems you should chase doing and which ones you shouldn't chase doing. And